Welcome to the Elokus channel, and we are now in class number 6 in the third discourse, Shom Yisroel, in the great classic B'Shosha Ekdimu 5672. We are holding now in the middle of chapter 10, the middle of Perek Yud. And we've been learning in the last couple of classes, we're learning about how this whole discourse, a continuation from what we began in the second discourse, and that is to explore the difference between, to differentiate in Atzilus itself, in the world of emanation itself, between the lights and the vessels. How, on the one hand, the lights are, because regarding Atzilus, we seem to find a contradiction. On the one hand, we say Atzilus means an emanation, which means it's not something new, it's not yesh Maayon, it's not something new, it's just a bringing forth a certain potential that was hidden, and it's just being revealed. On the other hand, we say even regarding the highest sfirot, the highest attributes, the first of them, Chachma, that is Chachma Maayon Timatze, that Chachma comes from nowhere, it's totally new. So the main point that we're developing over here is that we will differentiate between the Oir and the Kelim. The Kelim, the vessels, they have design, they have definition, they have character. So they're already defined. In that sense, they're mugabal, they have gavul, they have limitation. So there's something new. You can't say that in the Ein Sof there are all these shapes, forms, and definitions. Not even in the subtlest way. However, when it comes to the Oiros, the lights, they are an emanation of the Ein Sof, albeit, of course, very much reduced, but still an emanation of the Ein Sof, and therefore it's a continuum to what was before. In this particular chapter, we're learning more about the coming into existence, the actual production of the Oiros versus the Kelim, and we were learning at great length how the Kelim are produced through a breakaway, not through a continuum. And we were analyzing that in terms of how the Kelim relate to the Ein Sof. Over there, for sure, there is a breakaway because it comes after a no. It comes after a complete removal from the Ein Sof, from the tzimtzum. The first tzimtzum, the first contraction, is a complete and absolute contraction. Then we were learning how, even regarding the oisiyas harishimu, the power of the limitation that is part of the Ein Sof, that comes forth as a result of the tzimtzum, even that. And that is the source, that's the space, so to speak, which is the source of the Kelim. Even to that, we learned that the way the oisiyas harishimu that became visible after the tzimtzum, the way they produced the Kelim, is not through the letters of the Rishimu revealing themselves in that process, but as we discussed in the earlier classes, but rather through a complete concealment. They themselves are a concealed power, and their impact is always anonymous, meaning in a manner of distance, not in a manner of the doer revealing himself in the thing that is being done. There is no connection. It's as if they are in one place and the other thing is happening in the other side of the globe, on the whole other, in a complete disconnected place. Something is taking place as a result of these Kelim. That's the way the Rishimu does its job. The way it does its effect is not in a manner of closeness, but in a manner of distance. And as we were also learning, and that's why we were learning that it's similar to a nitzutzim, like a snoitzutzos. That was the last thing we learned. The snoitzutzos, meaning like sparks that separate from a fire. They exist far away. They're not a continuum of what was before. And we also learned that even the light of the kav, which is the active energy that is needed in order to produce anything, we need active energy, and that is somewhat of a revelation. We learned even that is the way it affects us through an accident, kind of through a collision, with the forward light meets the rebounding light, and they collide, and that colliding of these two powers drop the letters, and from those letters are where the Kelim are created from. So we see that on all levels there is a disconnect in order to create the Kelim, or to bring about the Kelim. Yet, on the other hand, this is always to remember, they're still Kelim of Atzilus. They're still vessels of the world of Atzilus, which means we do not look at these vessels as powers that are not God, but rather they are Him. It's not creation yet. It's the world of Atzilus. These are divine attributes. So much so that we say that He and His attributes are one. And so much so that we can even refer to God's names. Remember, we learned about this. We learned that the 7 names that we refer to God is referring not to the vessels themselves, but at least to the energy of the Rishimu that is vested in those vessels. So we see how godly they are. So that's the whole dance. You see, when you're learning Hasidus like this, you're always dancing back and forth. Everything is kind of needs to be, on the one hand, we say like this, but then we take it back and we say, but however, it's still. So we have to be able to find the right balance over here. On the Kalim, that the Kalim they are created in a state of distance, they're in a state of separation, they're in a state of the way they come into existence is in a manner of separation. They're not separated, they're very much attached to the Ein Sof. But the way they emerge is in a manner of disconnect because they could not in any way be a continuum of what was in a state. They can't flow in a continuum because a continuum of the Ein Sof, of the infinite, would always be infinite and therefore not have these limitations and these boundaries. But on the other hand, once they come into being, they are very much Him. So this is what we're going to be learning now mainly, to try to figure out how they are still Him, how they're not a creation. What differentiates the Kalim from being like the next world? The world of Bria is already a world of creation, where over there already the entities are already separate beings. But over here, Atzilus is still an emanation of God. And when we say emanation is referring not only to the Oirais, but it's also referring to the Kalim. Although we've said earlier, if you remember, that the primary idea of the Kalim is Yesh Maayon, something from nothing. And the Oiros, they are the Atzilus element, the emanation, what was once there, and then it's just coming in. Yes, that's if we're looking at Atzilus as a continuum of the Ein Sof, as a projection without a breakaway. Yeah, that we can only say on the Oiros. But in as much as we say that the entire world of Atzilus is Elokus, it's divine, that refers even into the vessels, even regarding the vessels of Atzilus. If that's the case, how does it work? On the one hand, they're Yesh Maayon, something from nothing, and on the other hand, they are a continuum. So this is what he is dealing with over here, and let's. I'm going to start again, chapter 10, even though we started over here, because last time we learned it at the end of the other class, and I think it needs to be reviewed and become clearer. Let's do it quickly. And even though the vessels of Atzilus are also Atzilus, they are really, literally Elokus, they're really divine. However, the divinity of these vessels, it's not an expansion of Elokus. It's not like a ray of the Or Ein Sof, of the Infinite One, of the Emanator, that it is emanating in a revealed continuum, in a revealed continuation of the Or Ein Sof. But rather in a manner in which it comes, in a manner of separation and distance. It's like a spark that got separated from the big blazing fire. On the one hand, there's nothing new here. It's not like when the spark is flying through the air. There's nothing other than the substance of the fire that was once the big fire. But it's no more part of the big fire. It's now standing alone. So that's the idea, that it's distant, but it's the same substance. But it's still separated from the big blaze. The Einer Meir, and it's not shining like the blazing fire of the torch itself, or that is shining. Yeah. But over here it's separated. The same is also with the vessels. They are literally Elokus, which means they're really divine. They have been emanated from the essence of the Or Ein Sof. From which element of the Or Ein Sof, not part, but from what aspect of the Or Ein Sof? As we said, we already traced the Kalim to the koach hareshimu, to the power of the reshimu, which means mepchenas koach hagvul shabo, from the power of limitation that the Ein Sof has. Remember what we stated from the Avodas HaKodesh, that the Infinite One, as part of his infinity, has to also have the ability to limit. So that ability to limit that's within the Ein Sof, that's the source of the vessels. And when it's not just a source, as we're learning over here, they emanated from that. Makom, but even from that level, the way they emanated was not as a continuum, but as a leap, as separated from it. They come in a state of separation from the essence. Like the Rekanti said, Rekanti is an early Kabbalah sefer. His name was Rabbi Menachem Rekanti. He has a sefer called Tamei HaMitzvos. He brings over here in the bottom in footnote 26 in the new version that his words, the Rekanti's words, are brought in the Chayat. I mentioned many times that there is a Kabbalah sefer called Chayat, which Chayat actually means a tailor, who is a Pirush on Sefer Mareches Elokus that we mentioned earlier also. And also in another book, Migdal David, on Shir HaShirim from the Radvaz, they both bring this teaching from the Rekanti, in which, from Rabbi Menachem Rekanti, must have been an Italian from the name, that's what I'm sensing, and that he, Italian, he was Jewish Italian, obviously, and that he, what's it called again, that he gives description regarding the Esesphiros, regarding the 10 attributes, regarding the Kalim. He says, Be'inyan Esesphiros, regarding the 10 Essphiros, the Ma'orei Agadol, from his great light, is Snoitetzu HaKalim, the Kalim became his Snoitetzu. Snoitetzu means they sparked off. The thing in the Snoitetzu is who? The idea of a Snoitetzu, what a Snoitetzu means, She'ein zik ma'yatzilas mamish. It's not like literally Atzilus. Shu'al derech va'ya'atzel min haruach. Remember, we learned that the meaning of Atzilus is Moshe Rabbeinu projected Moses, when he said, I can't handle it, he projected onto these elders. His energy was projected into them. He beamed his light onto them. This is not the way the Kalim are. It's not a beam, because a beam is a continuation. It's like the source of light is beaming in, so you can sense where it's coming from a different source. Here it gets interrupted. That would be, beaming would be like a ray that is connected to its source. Or like a flame that is flaming out of a coal. So the coal, let's say when you have a coals and you want to bring the fire out and you blow on it and you make a fan with you fan it, you use a towel or something to fan the flames. And when you're doing that, the flames leap out. So they're connected to the coal. It's not like, but a spark becomes disconnected and flies away. So, but if we hit, so the regular meaning of Atzilus by Moshe is it's like Moshe is the coal, and the fire from Moshe's soul, his divinity, his godly ability, his prophecy was leaped and connected to the souls of the 70 elders, but they remained attached to Moshe. They were plugged in. Which isn't the case of the Yisnoitzetzus of a sparking, comes in a manner of separation. And we can say the inyan Yisnoitzetzus inyan Nefilas Oisiyos. It's similar to the idea of the fallen letters. So going back to the concept that we learned earlier, that when there was a collision between the lights and it drops these letters, that's the concept. Something becomes separated. These letters become disconnected from the light and they fall, which means they're now not reflecting the nature of the light, because they dropped from the light canal. And therefore, even though they are literally a lukus, that's why it's called Atzilus. Now I'm going to skip big time, because there's we're coming back to this, but we're going to skip these parentheses over here, so that and there's a few parentheses. So there's one parenthesis, and there's another parenthesis in the parentheses. So we're going to go down a bunch, and the third set of parentheses, but you'll find it's like quite a half a page further, and it says Makol Makoim, nevertheless, Hareim Gam Kein B'Bchinas Yesh Maayon. It's a very strange situation over here. They are divine, but there's still something from nothing. That's what we said about Chachma Vatzilus. We said Chachma is something from nothing. It's as if it's something totally new, yet it's divine. And, if I'm not afraid to talk, to say things, because, it's very, very, these are scary things to say, but this is kind of the way I'm seeing it. It's like it's like godliness, it's like the infinite metamorphosizes himself into something divine. So it's still him, but he metamorphosizes something new. It's like the caterpillar metamorphosizes into a butterfly. So essentially, the butterfly is the caterpillar, but it has a complete new existence. It's called a metamorphosis. It's a complete transformation. So in this sense, it's the infinite metamorphosizes itself into spheres, into attributes. And obviously we understand, it's not like God left his infinity and his boundlessness and he's existing on two levels. He's existing as infinite beyond, fully in the abstract. And at the same time, he metamorphosizes a spark of himself, so to speak, into these attributes, but they're still him. If we can find a little example to that, is it explains the difference. I'm just using a reference to this because maybe some of the listeners might be more familiar with this concept. Perhaps I'm using it just as a something to do a similarity, just like that. It's explained in many places the difference between all creations and a soul. That creation means that God is creating a creation. That's everything. Everything that is within the world, all the material substances and even spiritual beings, angels and the like. A creation means the divine, even though all of it has godly energy, but godly energy is creating something that is not the energy. The divine energy is bringing about an entity that has limitations and boundaries, and this is a very important point, feels itself as something new, has a self other than the energy creating it. Okay, that's an important point, which doesn't apply in the case by our spheros, we're going to see soon. But I'm just trying to tell you what we say, what is a creation? Creation is a limited being. It too has divine energy in it because nothing can exist without divine energy. But the divine energy is creating something. God says, for instance, let there be light. He is not the light. He is saying, let there be light. And the light is being created. Okay, so the light is something new, which he produced with his words, let there be light. However, when Hashem made the soul, particularly we're talking about the Jewish soul, which is a piece of God from above. Regarding the Jewish soul, it says that it's not that God said, let there be a soul and something new is created, but rather the divine energy itself is the soul. Not it's making a soul, it is the soul. But the soul is not God. The soul is a being. So how does it work? So it's explained that godliness itself, there's a phrase in Chassidus, Elokus Shanasa Nivra, that divinity becomes a creation. So really, it's not that it produces a creation, it creates a creation, it evolutionizes itself, evolves itself into a created being, which means, therefore, that in its essence, it's beyond being a created being. It kind of traps itself into definitions, so now it is a defined being, but it's really an infinite being and a continuation of God that transports itself into a created state of being. And that's a soul. So it's different than a creation. So similar to this idea, but on a much higher level, we will say that the Or Ein Sof, the infinite one, and especially the power of limitation that's in the infinite, the powers of the Rishimu, the Koach HaGvul, the power of Gvul that's in the Ein Sof, when it's still a Rishimu, it's still a Rishimu of the Or Ein Sof. It's still very much Or Ein Sof. It's just the power of the Or Ein Sof to be limited. Now, we learned earlier, it produces far away from itself, which means what it will produce is not connected to what it is. And you don't see a continuum because there's no more Ein Sof to it. It's like something truly limited. So what does that mean? He's jumping from his infinity and landing as a limited being and as a sphere and as an attribute. And there is a leap in between. And we might say a space in between. But it's still him. Now what makes the Sphira is different than a soul is that a soul becomes a nivra, a created being. A created being means a soul has a consciousness of self other than God. The attributes, the kelim, have no sense of otherness than God. They know they are nothing more. Their sense, not just knowing it intellectually, but their very aware consciousness of self is they're nothing other than the infinite manifesting as a defined particular energy. There is no breakaway. There's no yesh. They don't become a yesh, a something. That's why I'm being very careful over here. I'm differentiating between the concept of divinity becoming a soul, becoming a creation, because there they become a created. Our souls have a consciousness of self. We have a certain I. Even when we're very holy, we say, I love you, God. There is already a state of separateness because there is an I and there's God, and I love you, God. So a soul, besides very few souls that don't go through this metamorphosis of becoming a creation, generally all souls become a creation. When we say that the power of the Rishimu, the power of the Koyach HaGvul and the Ein Sof, takes a magnificent leap and leaps into a specified entity, like we said earlier, like a spark that separates from the fire, it doesn't become a creation. Because it never becomes a being with a separate consciousness. However, it's God. However, it's God transporting himself into something small, something defined. And its definitions, its limitations, its boundaries is something utterly new. It doesn't exist in the Ein Sof. So this is really amazing idea. But this is what he's explaining over here. A makol makom, as he says, let's go back over there. It's still something from nothing. Mipnei, and the reason, not because of the consciousness, not because it gets separate consciousness. So it's not yesh me'ayin. He's differentiating. Very different than the yesh me'ayin of a creation. A creation, when it becomes, because it gets created in a state of separation, it becomes cut off completely, and it feels itself as something other than God. Right? That's what God wants us to feel. We feel ourselves. But these Sphirot do not. They're totally tuned in to be one with the Ein. They're just conscious that the Ein Sof wishes himself to be in a limited state so he can create a limited world. That's kind of what it is. But the reason that we refer to them as yesh me'ayin, something from nothing, because they're limited. So there is a real limitation over here. And if God is being himself, he's not limited. So it's almost like God is being not himself. He's being in a form. He's being in a form of limitation. And therefore there is no comparison between them to the Or Ein Sof that is limitless. Now remember, this is only the vessels, not the Or that's flowing in the vessels. But the vessels have no comparison. They're completely inconsequential, and you can't even find a trace of them in the Or Ein Sof. It's something totally new. V'hisavusam, and the coming into being, hu b'derech ein aroch, is in a manner of there is no comparison. Now we can says v'yois. We're going to go back to the parentheses soon. And so much, it's gewalt. Listen to this. So much is this like a new entity and completely, utterly nothing compared to the infinite, because to an infinite being, all finitude is nothing. So to God, these Sphirot are absolutely nothing, although he transports himself to be them. This is the weirdest thing you can imagine, but this is the way it is. And he says, take a look. The distance of how far these Sphirot are in terms of who they are, that this is Chachma, this is Chesed. Now you have to understand something. We're talking about infinite kindness, infinite wisdom. But the very fact that it is defined as wisdom, it is defined as kindness, it is so insignificant to the Ein Sof, so unrelatable to the Ein Sof, more than the difference between Atzilus and a rock or a piece of sand at the beach. You say, the spheros of Atzilus, the attributes of Atzilus, wow! And can you compare it to a sand, a grain of sand? Oh, what's a grain of sand? It's nothing, a piece of matter. Yes, the difference between the piece and matter and these kalim of Atzilus, although the difference of them, meaning how different they are, how removed they are one from each other, is indescribable how distant it is, how far it is, yet it's still a measurable distance versus the difference between the Or Ein Sof and these attributes is an immeasurable difference. And therefore they are infinitely more nothing to God than the sand is nothing to these spheros. And he's going to prove it over here. V'yoyser, and more. And more than the physical world of Asiya, our world. The more than our world has no value in comparison to the world of Atzilus. Chulu. The difference between the Spheros and the Ein Sof is even more. Now why? Now he's going to prove. He's going to prove that the value of the physical world, of our world to Atzilus, is more. Although it's very little, but it's still more than the value of Atzilus to the Ein Sof. Because really the truth is like this. The vessels of the world of Atzilus become the soul. They're the divine. Again, why did we need these attributes? Let's go back. The attributes were needed to create the worlds with limited energy. A limited defined world, a created world, can't come about from infinite energy. So the energy has to be broken down into small little crumbs, which these crumbs of divine energy come from Atzilus. And therefore we say that Atzilus becomes the soul power of the next three worlds, Bria, Yetzir, and Asiya, which are the three realms of creation. Now, since Atzilus is their soul power that is vested in them, that means that they have already some kind of a equality, some kind of a relevance to Atzilus, if Atzilus is their soul. Because the vessels of Atzilus, Nas, and Neran become Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Lebiyah, to the three lower worlds of Bria, which is the world of creation, Yetzirah, the world of formation, and Asiya, the world of completion. And everything that is created in the three lower worlds of Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya, everything, from fire, wind, water, and earth, to all the different complex creatures that there are, from the mineral to the plant, to the animal, to the human. That's in our world, and including the spiritual worlds above angels and souls, everything that exists in all three worlds. Their substance, the matter that creates them, that produces them, what brings them into being, what's their what we might say their force, their soul force, that produces them, every element of them, it's all from the vessels of Atzilus. The Iu v'Garmiu, now how the vessels of Atzilus, that's not God. It is, because the Iu v'Garmiu chad livrei, as it says in Zohar, that God unifies with those vessels, they become one with Him, and God creates with them and through them finite creatures. Now, it says in Zohar that He and His attributes, He and His garments create, so He unifies with the garments. Means the Or Ein Sof Himself unifies with the attributes. So the Or Ein Sof has no relationship to the creations. He's infinitely above. When we say above, we mean completely above. Completely. There is no trace of connection at all between infinity and the defined creatures of any world. But that's the Him. But the He vests Himself in His vessels, and with those vessels are relatable to the creation. But His garments, have a connection to the creations. And therefore, and as a result of them, it creates, that's what's, so to speak, the spiritual material to create all four worlds. Hare, let's skip again the parentheses over here because I just want to finish the chapter before we're done. And then we're going to go back to all the parentheses in the next class. Hare sheyesh lameza erech. So you see that the vessels have somewhat of a comparison, somewhat of a value, or the worlds, the lower worlds, have somewhat a connection to Atzilus, if he's their soul. And his design is imprinted in them. They're like tiny little miniatures, so to speak, of the grandeur, infinite design of all worlds that is really designed of Atzilus. But the vessels of Atzilus to higher to the Or Ein Sof is completely new. It's totally unrelated at all. So the vessels of Atzilus to the Or Ein Sof, let me put it this way: when the Oiros of Atzilus create the three lower worlds, not the Oiros, the Kalim of Atzilus, the vessels of Atzilus it creates them by immersing themselves, investing themselves. It sort of means a soul. It invests themselves in them. But how does the Or Ein Sof create the Kalim of Atzilus? Not through investing himself in them, quite on the contrary, by distancing himself from them, like we've discussed in the earlier classes. It's created from distance, not from closeness. So here you see that the vessels of Atzilus are farther away from the Or Ein Sof than the three lower worlds are from the world of Atzilus. And yet, Atzilus is still divine. So that's what we were saying. God takes a quantum leap to become, so to speak, to have of himself be these attributes. And from there he creates. Obviously, this all needs more explanation, and we're still going to explore this in the next 2 classes, probably. Meanwhile, let Mashiach be here today.